So why is everyone leaving Throne and Liberty? It's been nearly 3 months since the global launch of the game. Now it feels like the perfect time to have a look on its current state. If you've checked out the Steam charts recently, you have probably noticed a pattern. The player base has been consistently declining. Each week we are losing 10 to 15% of the player base. Of course, it's a niche game and it's also normal that players leave after the initial launch hype. But the problem is, this trend doesn't seem to stop. So what is really driving players away? To dig deeper, I decided to gather perspectives from all kinds of different players. I put up a post on Reddit asking for your feedback. Spoke with people from casual guilds, from hardcore PvP guilds, and even players who've already quit the game. From all these perspectives, I identified the key issues that players currently have with the game. And I will explain those problems with my experience with over 1000 hours in the game. And of course, I'm doing all of this because I love the game. I want it to succeed. But for this, we just have to talk about the problems. So the first thing everyone was talking about was the combat. Yes, they did a lot of improvements from when the game was initially released. And yes, it feels pretty decent in small-scale PvP and also in PvE. But the problem starts in large-scale PvP, where everything often feels so incredibly clunky. And there are two problems that have been mentioned from you over and over again. Okay, problem number one. Everyone noticed this after his first large-scale PvP fight. And that's just the incredible bad targeting. And this is just something that needs to be on the top of their priority list. Because this is so frustrating to play. You just want to throw your PC out of the window sometimes. So even if you have the perfect settings, it just feels so incredibly clunky. And for a tap target MMO, not being able to consistently and easily select targets is just not acceptable. Okay, problem number two, and this has been mentioned by everyone I was talking to and has been also mentioned by you guys plenty of times on Reddit, and that's just the sheer amount of CC that's currently in the game. And here the best example is of course the tornadoes from the bow. This skill alone just kills all the fun of GVGs and large scale PvP, especially for melee players. And in combination with the targeting system, it's often such a clunky and frustrating experience. Either you are getting knocked up consistently in the air, or the players that you are trying to hit are getting knocked up. And yes, you can itemize against it. But in this clip you see I have 580 collision resistance and I'm still getting knocked up into the air 4 times in a row. Like, this just makes you want to just stand up and jump out of the window. And yes, there are currently a lot of things really bad and they are really hard to fix. But here you can just simply remove the skill specialization of the tornado. No one likes it and it doesn't benefit the game at all. And the game experience for everyone would be just better if the skill specialization would be deleted. But besides that, there are just currently so many CC spells in the game, and the problem with that is that the visualization of the CC is often really bad. And that's just really frustrating because your brain is not realizing that you are actually CC'd. So if you're in a fight and you're getting CC'd and you don't know why you can't move, then it just feels overall really clunky. Your brain needs to immediately understand that you are CC'd. I have no clue how they can fix that, but it's a huge problem. So the combat in general is really not bad, but when it comes to targeting and the CC, there just needs to be a lot of improvement. And some of them are just really easy, and it would help just to reduce a lot of the current clunkiness. Okay, so the next thing we have to talk about comes up every week multiple times on Reddit, and that's just the toxicity in dungeons. So this has been a problem since the release of TL. So either by flaming people how bad they are, or telling them how dare they come into a new dungeon without watching a guide up front, or just by simply kicking people out of the group as soon as they made one mistake. And all of that is obviously not nice. And this is what really kills it for a lot of players, especially new players. We could now simply say, oh, the community of Throne and Liberty is just really bad and toxic. But I think that's just a really stupid take, and it's just simply not true. It's as stupid as saying that League of Legends players are more toxic than Counter-Strike players, or vice versa. In every game we have a lot of toxic players, but certain games make us just more toxic due to certain systems, mechanics, game features or missing elements in the game. And then certain games can make the nicest person really toxic and rage, because certain elements in the game have just bad design. Okay, but in other MMOs, people are not so toxic in dungeons. So why are people getting so toxic in TL? One big problem is that the mechanics can sometimes feel a little complicated, because the game doesn't explain the mechanics at all. And often everyone has a certain job, and if one person fails, this can be already devastating. And it's always really hard to understand what you did wrong or what you did right, because so many things are just happening at the same time. It's just really easy to see when you know how it works, but at the beginning it's just really hard to get. So this is already not a perfect design. But in addition, I think a big problem is that we have guides for all of those dungeons before they get even released. So people like me just played in Korea and then made guides for those dungeons before they're even out. So what is happening then is that some players will watch those guides and others won't. And then the players who watch the guides complain on day one about why others don't know how the boss works and why they didn't watch a video. This creates an even more toxic environment. Of course, this happened now for all 1-star and 2-star dungeons, and it will again happen for all the 3-star dungeons. So the question is, what can they do? I think they just have to explain the mechanics somehow in the game. That would help so much. Give the players the possibility to understand the mechanics in the game. Some nice animation, some pictures on how to move and so on. I think that would really help a lot here and take away a lot from this toxic environment, because people could just quickly understand in an in-game guide what they actually did wrong. So the next topic we just have to talk about are the dimensional trials and the runes. So both systems that just have been recently added. So the dimensional trials are just your mythic plus-like system where you can have up to 30 difficulties of a dungeon. And you do those trials to get your runes. Well, these are just stones you can put into your weapons and accessories, which are important for your current endgame progression. So it doesn't matter who I asked or where I looked for feedback, just everyone was saying something negative about the implementation. Okay, so I love the idea of runes. They just give you a lot of options to customize your character. And I also really love challenging PvE content. And I really don't want to flame here on the developers or on the game. But this implementation is one of the worst implementations I've ever seen from systems that are actually really great. Okay, what do I mean by that? So first of all, you are implementing a system with 30 tiers of difficulty. And of course you want to give the bosses new mechanics. That's of course really important and totally fine. But instead of changing the mechanics of the boss throughout the full 30 tiers, you give them all these new mechanics by tier 5. So the first 2 tiers are super easy. And then you give all the new mechanics the players from tier 3 to tier 5. But if you have mastered tier 5, then it's always the same until tier 30. And you could see how the majority of the groups were struggling heavily already on tier 3. And this is of course super demotivating if you have 30 tiers and you struggle already on tier 3. And again, remember, there's no in-game explanation and it's really hard to understand what you actually have to do. What is that doing? Right, it creates toxicity. You have a nice system here with 30 tiers, you have nice mechanics from the bosses, and you could spread them out through all of those tiers here, giving players more and more mechanics with each tier. Players would be able to clear more and more tiers and feel a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day. Wow, today I mastered 4 more tiers in this dungeon. Wow, the people I did the dungeon with were so great. People would just feel happy. And that would be a great design. But instead the game overloads the players with new mechanics way too early. People just get frustrated and quit the game. If they want to make those systems more accessible for everyone, they need to make here definitely changes in the future. Okay, now let's talk about runes, which are currently just a huge part of your endgame progression. With the most recent update they just released, you can farm runes now also decently in other ways than just the dimensional trials. But if you have tried it, you will quickly notice that the rune gain is really low. Until you level your runes to level 60, Amazon will already release level 80 runes. So when it comes to farming runes, the best way is by far still dimensional trials. And if you want to stay competitive as a PvP player, you need runes. But the only way to effectively farm runes is hard PvE content. And the changes they made with this patch were already really good and going into the right direction. But that's just not enough. A PvP player should be able to farm runes just with PvP content. So many PvP players just quit the game because they are forced to do PvE content. And that's just not some dungeon farming. This is really hard PvE content. I think it's good that this whole rune farming is a grind, which is totally okay, but the content needs to be fun for the players. For PvE players, grinding for weeks or months in hard dungeons is fine. But forcing a PvP player to do that is of course not okay. They of course need PvP content where they can farm those runes. And this farming method should be as effective as going two-dimensional trials. This should be just complete alternative. And players could do what they like to do to farm those runes and everyone could be happy. Okay, so don't get me wrong here. Like, these systems are just really great and I just love both of them. But the implementation of those are just so bad and we just really quickly need here changes. And let's just really hope that this is not too late. Because I know for a fact that this is killing the fun for so many players. Okay, now we have to talk about guild, alliances and PvP. So in Throne Liberty, the major PvP content is for sure large-scale PvP. So a couple of times a week you have GVGs, so Rift Zones and Boonstones, and then you have with your alliance world boss fights every day and castle sieges every 2 weeks. From my point of view, the best content in Throne of Liberty is by far the GVGs. Of course they have also some problems, but overall they are really fun. But the problem is here that you more or less need a hardcore PvP guild to have good PvP. Of course, if you are not in a hardcore PvP guild, you can have some small scale PvP in arenas or some fights in the open world dungeons. But if you want to have good large scale PvP, which is just the major content in this game, there is nothing you can do without a competitive hardcore guild. But if you are then in such a hardcore guild and you are attending to all of those events, then it can quickly feel like a second job. And I saw a lot of posts regarding that on Reddit as well. But if you want to have good PvP, competitive PvP, this is just the only way you have. So smaller guilds won't get any good GVGs and will be completely destroyed in all other open world PvP events. So what do you do if you want to have good PvP, but you don't want to join a hardcore PvP guild? You can't do good PvP content, except for arenas, and that's for most people just not enough. So of course the obvious solution would be to have something like battlegrounds of 10v10 or 20 vs 20, and I really hope they would introduce that with the wargame feature. But here you just create your own lobby with up to 300 players and you have no rewards. I'm not sure what they intended here with this feature, but this is of course not a solution what a lot of players were hoping for. So this is already a huge problem, that a lot of people just want to do some PvP, but there's just really no possibility for them. We need to have some kind of a battleground, some kind of a possibility for those kind of players to have good PvP content. Okay, so the second major problem, which I've heard from everyone I was talking to and I was also reading plenty of times on Reddit, are the alliances. Alliances are just a group of guilds which are just fighting together on all open world events, so world bosses or castle sieges and all of that. And it's a nice idea that could bring some political elements and just drama into the game. And to a certain degree that's really good in MMOs. You could write here some really amazing stories between the conflict of certain alliances. But for all this to work, you need to have a system which balances everything out. And this is not really happening in this game. But instead what is happening is that these mega alliances are being created, which are just dominating all the servers. And this is of course just a really huge problem, because this is just killing the fun for everyone. Except maybe for the players who are in these alliances, but for the most part, no one really has fun of that. So I think the idea is really good, but I haven't seen that really working for a long time. The problem is that a lot of content is designed around alliances, so you can't just simply remove the feature. But you need to find a solution here to balance it a little bit better out, to make it fun for everyone. Okay, so let's sum that up. It's nice to have a guild-centric PvP game, but there needs to be also PvP content for players who are not in a hardcore PvP guild. And alliances are not functioning as they should, and they probably need a re-rig in some way. Okay, so the last topic I haven't heard from so many players, but I just want to talk about it because I think it's really important, and that are the character stats. And they are in general really nice in Throne Liberty. You have so many different stats, which gives you just so many possibilities to design your character. And this is just definitely a huge plus for Throne and Liberty. But one big problem here is that the game doesn't explain what certain stats are actually doing. And often the in-game descriptions are even just misleading. I can tell you that more than 50% of the current active player base is not understanding the major stats correctly. They might think they do, but they don't. That's why, for example, I've made a lot of videos explaining on how certain stats work. Can just upload a really good video on hit versus evasion. And the problem is that it's really needed, because the game is not explaining those stats. All of the stats, what is attack speed exactly doing, what is damage reduction doing, what is crit doing, what is base damage doing, how big are the diminishing returns. Something like this needs to be somehow visible in the game. If I can't see that in game, it's really confusing for players. And when they then see certain videos explaining how certain stats work and realize maybe that they built their character completely wrong, it's obviously again really frustrating and makes them want to quit. They just need a good way of explaining those stats in the game. I'm not sure how they would do that, but from the first place they could update their descriptions. That would already help a lot. So not a lot of people were talking about this, but I think it's still really frustrating for a lot of people, even though they don't realize it. And I just think Throne Liberty does here a really bad job on explaining those stats. So these were just the biggest, most talked about issues. Of course, there's more like perfect Q block scripting, performance during large-scale PvP battles, time gating stuff, pay-to-win elements, no assists for healers, balancing, and the list goes on. But these were just the most discussed and mentioned points from your side. I really love this game and I wanted to succeed, but the devs just needs to focus on those kind of problems, otherwise I don't see here the trend stopping soon. But what do you think? What are the biggest problems right now in Throne and Liberty? Let me know in the comments. If you like the content and want to support me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see ya in the next one.